Hey guys, welcome back to the Matt Brown Show. I'm going to have an incredible conversation, I'm sure, with this incredibly gorgeous, young and talented lady, Candice Mama. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Oh my God. I love this. Can I start my day like this every day? This is awesome. Thank you for having me, Matt. It's such a cool setup. It really is.
Fantastic. Well, it's obviously a privilege and honor being here. We were talking just before we went live on air that this man here, Justin Cohen, author of Pitch to Win, is one of your best friends.
Yeah, I mean, how lucky am I, right? Or unlucky, I'm kidding, Just. Yeah, he's one of my best friends, and he's honestly one of the most incredible human beings in the world. So I listened to his interview with you, and I was like, yeah, he's actually quite smart.
Who, me or him?
I was like, I'm so excited to meet Matt.
I know Justin too well.
Yeah, exactly. No, but he's incredible. He's incredible.
He
and he does actually give a lot of value in his conversations. Hence, I kept him as a friend.
Well, you're guilty, but it's like the whole peer group thing, right? So it's like, if you're hanging out with 10 international best-selling authors, you'll probably be number 11.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping, because it is a lot of pressure to be friends with Justin, because he's such a, go-getter, and he's like so incredible at everything he does. And, to even like send him stuff to like review, I'm always like, oh, shit.
I would never do that. You'd have to incorporate his perspective the whole time. Because it's usually not wrong.
That's the thing, right? But the thing is, I'll fight it. I'll always fight it. And then I'll come back to it when I've had time to, cool off. And I'll be like, it wasn't that bad. I think I could incorporate one or two things, everything.
So let's talk about you. I mean, I know what we're going to dive into today, but what's the headline backstory about Candice Mama? Who are you and what you're all about?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think I am someone who I try to bring joy to people's lives. I try to show people that they can live outside of trauma. They can live outside of that one narrative that sometimes we get so married and attached to. So that's really become my life mission, or my life goal, to really try and show people their best selves, without being preachy or coming across as, this is my opinion, take it, but really saying, okay, this is my experience, this is my story. And if it can spark an idea in your mind that will allow you to view your life differently, then I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah, I mean, and you do have a very interesting story. And it begins with your father. Why don't you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a heavy story, Matt. Are you ready?
Always.
Okay. Okay, so when I was 9 months, my father was brutally murdered by an apartheid assassin by the name of Eugene De Kock. And so that, of course, changed the trajectory of my whole life. I grew up in my mom was coping with having lost a husband, but I didn't grow up in the most supportive, emotionally supportive environment. So by the time I was around 16, I had a lot of resentment. I was incredibly angry. I was lashing out, I don't actually remember if I even knew what joy was, to be honest. I'd laugh a lot, but I never really felt happiness. So around 16, I'm lying in bed and I felt this pain in my chest and I was like, what is happening? So I went to my mom's room and I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And so she rushed me to the hospital and the doctor put me like under a gastroscopy and like under anesthesia. And when I woke up, he said, you weren't having a heart attack, but he was like, but the stress symptoms in your body are so severe that I've never seen this in my years of experience and you're only 16. So at that point, the words I heard were, you dying. And to be honest, I was pretty okay with it. I was like, okay, well, if I'm dying, I'm dying. It's not a big deal. And so a couple of weeks, months later, I think I was always a competitive athlete. So I was about to run and I saw like this family playing and I just thought, I've never experienced joy. Like, I don't know what happiness feels like. And I'm like, and if I'm going to die, I want to at least try and experience what this happiness thing is. And so I started taking a journey to finding what made me happy, finding what brought me joy, and also having to let go of a lot of things that held me down and didn't, contribute to my joy. And only around the age of 18, I thought, hey, wait a minute. I think I'm feeling happiness. I think, I'm actually I'm cool right now. And an article about Eugene had come up because prior to that, every time Eugene would even be mentioned in the news, whether he was applying for parole or I'd see, someone covering his story, I'd get severe palpitations. I would break out into a sweat and it would affect me for days on end, because I'd just be replaying him in my mind. And once around 18, 19, I saw an article and I was like, hey, I didn't feel anything. I didn't react. And then I thought it was a fluke. So I was like, okay, it's fine. And then a few months later, I went out of my way to really Google him, and I still felt nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. And that's when I realized that I had actually managed to forgive this person. However, I'd never thought I'd actually meet him. So when I was 23, I got home and my mom says, I got a call from the National Prosecuting Authorities and they want to know if you want to meet Eugene. And for the first time, I was like, wait, was that an illusion? Did I forgive him? How am I going to react? But immediately I said yes, because I knew if I didn't see him, I'd always question myself for the rest of my life. So there we went. A couple of weeks later, my older brother was like, I'm not sure if I want to do this. My mom was like, well, I'm going to go if someone is going. So eventually on the day, my brother was like, I'm coming. So it was me, my younger brother who's from my stepdad, my older brother, and my grandfather and my mom. So there we go to Kosimampura prison in Pretoria. And they counsel us. We get there, they counsel us. There was a counselor, a priest, the dean of the prison. And they're like, you're about to meet this man. If it ever gets overwhelming, please let us know, and that kind of thing. And then they gave us tea and scones. And they sat us down, right? And it's it was very strange because it felt like you were just attending a boardroom meeting. And it was a boardroom setup. So the chairs were, put in this rectangular shape. And so the furthest point was my mom. Then it was my grandfather from my dad's side. And then it was my older brother, my younger brother, myself. And then next to me, it was going to be, it was the priest. And then there was an empty chair, just opposite me. And that was going to be for Eugene. So I thought, okay, cool. They're going to give us a grand announcement when this man walks in. So we're all having conversations amongst ourselves. And then I was the first to turn around and I was like, oh shit, here he is. And I was just shocked. I was like, whoa. And so the priest was like, oh, here's Eugene, everyone. So he made the announcement. And so that is when our encounter began. And so my mom started with the questions because I literally couldn't say anything. And my mom was like, what happened to my husband? So Eugene broke it down and he said, it was an ambush. We had an askari in the camp. So an askari is a turncoat that we placed in the camp, and we needed, young, capable people to be in the vehicle. And my dad was a very skilled driver, so he was going to be the designated driver to get into Nelspruit and out. And so Eugene's team were actually waiting for the vehicle. And so they had a white car that was going to show them that the car behind them was going to be my dad's car. So as this car drove past the bridge, then Eugene and his team started firing at the car, at my dad's car. So when Eugene saw that the car wasn't coming to a stop, he ran down the Nelspruit Bridge and he emptied out his magazine cartridge on my father. And when he still saw signs of life in the vehicle, he doused them all in fuel and then he set them alight. So after that, they waited for the flames to burn out. And while they were waiting, they actually had a braai a couple of minutes, a couple of, kilometers away where they could still see, the car burning out. And so Eugene explained all of this to us, and it was the first time we actually knew what had happened. And then my mom said, second, question is, why my husband? And I think it was for the first time I actually felt incredible pain in the encounter. And he said, no reason. So I was like, whoa, so my dad died for no reason, so the encounter, it went on. And then my mom said, I forgive Eugene. And then my older brother and my grandfather and my younger brother's like, I'm just here because I don't want to be at school. And then it got to me. And I looked at Eugene and I said, Eugene, I want to say I forgive you. But before I do, I want to ask you one thing. And he said, okay, what's that? And I said, do you forgive yourself? And for the first time in the encounter, he went from, just being the stoic person, and he looked away, he was uncomfortable, and he muttered something, and he kept quiet. So I looked at him and I said, you still haven't answered my question. And then he looked back up at me and he said, you know, every time a family comes, that's one question I hope they never ask me. And today you've asked me. And he looked away and he wiped the side of his eye. He dabbed the side of his eye and he looked back at me and he said, when you've done the things I've done, how do you forgive yourself? So in that moment, I just broke down. I just started crying. And it wasn't so much for what I had lost, but for the first time, I actually saw a human being in front of me. And I thought to myself, you know, had I been in his position, firstly, I can't say if I would have turned out any better, and how much pain he must have been carrying, you know. So the encounter ended and I was the first to get up. So I got up and I went around to him and I said, you know, Eugene, would you mind if I gave you a hug? And he looked at me a little shocked, and he got up and then he hugged me and he said, I'm so sorry for what I've done, and your father would have been so proud of the woman you've become. So then that was the end of that encounter. And yeah, so that has been my life with, you know, forgiveness and the lot.
Crazy. There's so much to get into there. But firstly, what an incredible story. I don't think, you know, the average, I can only speak for myself, but like, so I have like a strange relationships with kind of like a lot of my family, because that's just how things plan out, you know, sometimes. And I haven't forgiven them in the way that you have, but your scenario is like someone was taken from you. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, and this is the paradigm shift that I really want to get into. But there's so much I want to explore. Going back to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, why did they want to introduce you to Eugene? What was their thinking there? Was it about this whole forgiveness healing opportunity and for you to meet this guy who took your father?
So this was not actually a TRC initiative. This was the National Prosecuting Authorities. So this was actually a part of a program where it was the Perpetrator Victim Program. And it was to try and bring people closure. You know, so for many people, you know, we had, I mean, you could call it a privilege of actually burying my dad's body. So we knew where it was. You know, we knew who had done it. Many people did not know who had done it, and the information was only coming out later. So it was just about, you know, facilitating some sort of healing, some sort of closure process. So it had been running for a couple of years by the time they'd reached out to my family. Yeah. And
what was the conversation internally within your family at the time? I mean, I'm sure there must have been some resistance to meeting him at all.
Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't something that any one of us took lightly, you know. And my family is very strange in the way we deal with conflict or grief or anything. We kind of start just making jokes about things, you know, and we really just make it like, okay, this is not going to affect me, you know. So if I can laugh about it, it doesn't impact me. But the biggest issue with that is, you know, when it does get serious, you know, none of us actually know how to deal with it, because like, okay, this is really happening. So what are we going to do? And like I said, like my older brother dealt with it in avoidance. He just didn't want to speak about it. He was like, well, we've moved past it. It doesn't matter. And I mean, he was 4 when my father passed away. So he has some sort of memory with my father. And then my mom was very much like, well, my life has moved on, you know, so I don't know, but I'll just go with whoever wants to go. And my grandfather from my dad's side, he's not a part of our life really. So we just told him that this is what's going to happen. Do you want to come? Because this was your son, you know. And he was just like, well, you know, if I can support you guys in that way, you know, then I'll come. So inside the family, it was quite a tense period. But I think in some ways, you know, I think we discussed it 1 or 2 times and everyone was just kind of like, well, let's just wait for the day to come, you know, and we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was your initial reaction to this? Because I imagine if you were so young when your father was taken from you, you kind of stitched together stories and things like that, but you don't really have an idea. That's the first thing, which is different for you. So when you're with your older brother being 4, he had something, right? So, but you didn't have anything. So I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. But then what happens, I imagine, in those sorts of situations, it's like, well, you also haven't met Eugene, right? So your brain like creates a monster, this guy who did this thing. Do you know what I'm saying? And your imagination, I imagine, runs with you at times. Even just the thought of, well, do I want to meet this guy? I mean, can you imagine? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I can't imagine that. Yeah. I mean, how did you approach getting over this kind of monster idea in your head? Because were you a protagonist in meeting Eugene, or like walk us through the exact steps that you took to overcome the initial like, fuck that, I'm not going to meet this guy?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question, because I think one part I actually did leave out in the initial story is, so when I was 9, my mom bought a book called Into the Heart of Darkness by Jogpo. And so she would always like send me to get this book whenever we'd have guests. And the reaction was always just so crazy to me, because people would cry, I'd hear screaming, but she'd always send me out of the room. So one day I was like, but I want to know, like, what is getting people so riled up? And so one day I was just like playing outside the door, and like I heard my mom saying, to the person, this is the page you should turn to. And again, a scream came out, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'd overheard the conversation that my dad was in this book. So I knew like pretty much what I'd patched together, that my dad was in the book, the person who killed him, and so on and so forth. So one day when my mom had left me home alone, I thought, I'm going to go look at what everyone was looking at. So I turned to the page, and the only picture was my dad's burnt body clutching a steering wheel. So for me, it started really forming, what had happened in my own mind. And so I think that created to heightening the trauma in a lot of ways, because I think up until around 8, 9, I was okay. Like I was an okay child. I understood that I didn't have a father, and I understood that I was missing something, but that was pretty much okay with me. But then when I saw that, it was almost like the lived trauma, because I couldn't tell my mom, like I just couldn't, because I was like, she's going to hit me, and, I wasn't supposed to look, and how, like, and even in growing up, my mom never spoke about my dad that much. It was just kind of like, oh, well, he died kind of thing. So it was really me piecing together these things, and from other people of saying, oh, this is the kind of person your father was. And, when you were born, it was like you guys gave him a reason to live, my older brother and I, and how he'd walk around the streets and parade us and be like, these are my kids, And so for me, I think both the advantage and disadvantages, I got to create who my father was. I didn't get to see his flaws. I didn't get to see the aspects of him that everyone else got to see. So I had this idealized, version. And when you have that, you can also create the life that could have been, right? You can say, I could have been this, and my life could have been that. And so you get to create this. So it becomes very difficult, whereby you have to now meet the person who's taken away this, vision from you. And this person is also a monster, right? Like, I mean, when you read about Eugene, or you Google him, prime evil, assassin of the state, he is very dehumanized, even in media and in literature. So I went in with that understanding that this man has no emotional capacity. This man is a monster. This man has no sense of human attachment or connection. And so for me, seeing that is what really broke me down. And I think, going in, I'd love to say, I had no bias as to how I was going to react. But the truth is, I went in with a lot of bias. I thought, I was going to walk in, I was going to hear what he had to say, and I was going to walk out unfazed, like, okay, whatever, this is not going to impact me. But I really did not think I'd have any sort of emotional feelings towards this person, so it was a very challenging time, because even after the encounter, I think I was actually more in an emotional state after we met, because I was so confused. I remember getting into the car and just thinking, what just happened? Did I just hug the man that killed my father?
Did I do the right thing?
Did I do the right thing? Was he deceiving us? I mean, this was a man who was so well trained, was he manipulating our emotions? So I had to kind of get my own basis of my feelings. And so I spoke to the head of the National Prosecuting Authorities, and I said, how do these encounters go? Like, what kind of a human being is he? And, she gave me some stories that I was like, okay, I don't feel like I was being duped. My emotions were valid, and I did do the right thing.
What kind of stories were shared with you around that? Because I suppose my initial reaction would be, why is this happening? And I guess I get that the NPA, I understand that thing, right? So having an opportunity to redress and stuff like that, and to heal and what have you. But what is his motivation? Because, I mean, do you have any insight into, because obviously we all change, and, he obviously fucked up, did some really bad things, right? But what were his motivations? Were you ever briefed on what those were? Or did he talk to you about what those things were?
Yeah, I mean, going in, I actually thought he was up for parole. I thought, he needed as many sympathy votes as he could get for parole, only to find that he had actually been denied parole. So the prospect of parole was not on the table for him at that time. So I was like, okay, cool. So he doesn't want parole. So like, what else is this? And then I found out that he had actually been working with the MPA to locate bodies, to help families get closure, to meet families, and because he had been either directly a part of so many of the missions or indirectly, it was just a thing that he wanted to do, he wanted to be a part of. And one of the stories that was actually shared with me was another family went to go see him. And this woman came in, and like when he came in, she started throwing her coffee mug at him and a saucer and everything she could find, really. And of course, the guards tried to hold her back. And he actually held the guards back, and he said, let her do what she needs to do to heal her trauma. There's nothing she can do to me that can, fix what I've done. So it was like that level of understanding almost, that got to me. And I was like, okay, so this man is not someone who is, like a Francois Niveau, who's just like, now found God and he wants, to seek, forgiveness. But this is someone who's come to the terms and realization with what he's done. And I think for me, the most challenging part was, when you realize how indoctrinated this, and I'm not justifying anything Eugene did, but he grew up in the system of indoctrination, right? And he does all these acts according to this righteous belief system. And then all of a sudden, a time comes when people are like, oh, by the way, what you believed is incorrect. So I can't even imagine how that would break me as a person, because am I just a bad person? Am I just evil? Am I just cruel? Because now all those actions no longer have any sort of, like everyone, you went from being celebrated and being this decorated soldier under the apartheid regime to all of a sudden now it's like, what you did was, no, it was wrong. So it is a lot tricky.
Yeah. What did you learn about overcoming trauma? So, because there's obviously different kinds.
Absolutely.
There's murder, there's rape, there's whatever you decide that is for you. It's all personal, it's all very unique, it's context dependent, but many times we just don't care to deal with resentment ever. It's much easier just to put your head in the sand and pretend. It's much easier to alienate than it is to confront and grow in that process. Where does one start to overcome trauma like the one that you experienced?
I think for me, it was really when I realized that it's a very personal journey, right? It is about me in many ways. So I think when the story first made media news and everyone was like, oh, she's a saint. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not a saint. I'm like, I got dumped last week. Trust me, I'm not a saint. So like for me, it was just really getting people to understand that it was something I had to do. It wasn't about Eugene. It wasn't about trying to liberate him or give him any sort of, feelings of like, okay, what I've done, I can now sleep better at night or live better. For me, it was, sorry.
Why did you feel that way? Because you had a choice.
Yeah.
And, your circumstances were very extenuating.
Yeah.
They were very traumatic. And they didn't just affect you. It's not like a breakup. Well, Absolutely. He cheated on me and now like I hate him, he must die. Yeah. This was like it affected your whole family.
I didn't say you must die.
You know what I'm saying? But it affected not just you, it affected Absolutely. Like everyone that you care about, and more broadly the community that that Absolutely. You come from. So it's way more pronounced. So you actually had a choice. Why did you feel Absolutely. That you needed to do this thing at all?
For me, I realized that if I hold on to this resentment, I can't move forward, because I think what we don't realize with trauma and resentment is it colors the way you view the world, whether you want it to or you don't, whether it's subconscious or not. It is, you walk through the world with your pain, and you want to believe that, oh, I'm actually so unbiased. I don't live in a pain bubble. I don't make decisions based on my trauma, but you do. And it is something that I had to come to terms with and say, everything about my life is like, it's filled with trauma. Every decision I make is from a trauma basis. And so I needed to heal that part of myself and say, I'm forgiving for me. And I think that's the hardest concept for people to get behind. But when you forgive someone, you're doing it for yourself. It is so that you don't get plagued by those memories. You don't get plagued by that, you know, moment again and again, because it's almost like repeated trauma. Because what happens is we go through these moments, right? So that's the first impact. But then every time you think about that thing, or every time you see that person, it triggers you again and again and again. And so in order for you to move forward, is you just need to take away the emotional response you have to that incident, you know, or to numb down the emotional response you have to that incident. So because we can never forget what's happened to us. It's a huge part of who we are, but you don't need to let it define you. So for me, I had to make the choice to, it's almost like what Nelson Mandela said without sounding like a fortune cookie, but, you know, when he said, you know, anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die, you know, and it is. You do have to just suck out that emotional venom in your own system so that you can live a more productive life and you can still move forward in life without that one person being in prison to that one person, you know. So for me, yes, in many ways it may have been a choice, but I think I had to, because I don't think I would have been here today if I didn't take that choice.
What would you say to someone that says, or who is battling to just make that choice? So when you say something like, you know, well, I did it for me, not for anyone else, and they're going, fuck that, I'm too hurt, you know, and they're holding on to things, which is ironic, because then you're the one that's actually just imprisoning yourself. To your point, you know, you holding on to these resentments, and then they become a pattern of behavior. Absolutely. Right? And a kind of like a lens that you're looking at everyone and everything through. It's like going back to the relationship thing. If you got cheated on, right? Now suddenly all men are bad.
Oh, 100.
You know what I'm saying? And it's funny because you find that they get into the same kind of relationships over and over again, because it's, I don't know, it's a funny thing subconsciously that we do to ourselves. But what do you say to someone that's that is holding on to resentment and cannot see a way to forgive?
You know, I think first the notion I try and at least get rid of, you know, in my conversational narrative is, you know, with the self-help movement, when it really became a booming thing with The Secret and all these things, there was a huge thing about like, this is positive emotion and this is negative emotion and you can't feel anything else, you know, you've got to constantly be in this positive frame of mind. And that's not the human experience, you know, and I think for us, as human beings on this journey, every emotion serves a purpose, you know, and it's about what is that emotional purpose that emotion is giving you. And I think when you start becoming accountable to yourself and you start telling yourself the truth, because, you know, like anger and resentment, right? There is a purpose they serve. Sometimes they can actually serve as fuel and as our drivers to move forward and be like, I will never be like my father. So I will always hold this resentment to remind myself, right? But I feel like you do need to experience that emotion. You need to experience the anger. I did not jump from resentment to forgiveness. You know, you need to experience the stages of grief. You need to experience the stages of anger, and then you need to release them, you know? So it's not about running away from the emotion, but it's about addressing and facing the situation. Because I think what I have at least come to find is people don't want to face what's really bugging them, right? So even that person that broke your heart, you really don't want to face the situation. You don't want to address it. You don't want to, you know, come to terms with what had happened. Because if you just say, I'm a victim to this, F them, you know, like I'm a victim and they can go to hell and I'm just going to move forward in my life. You fail to sit back and be like, actually, you know, this happened to me. This person really messed me up and it had nothing to do with me. It was all about them, you know, and until we can really sit down with ourselves and hold ourselves accountable to our emotions, I don't think we can even entertain the thought of forgiveness, you know, and only after we've held ourselves accountable, we've addressed our hurt, we've addressed our pain, can we then seek the path of forgiveness. Yeah.
It's a spiritual solution to practical real world problems. And that's actually what we're talking about here. So have you read, what's that book? He's that comedic guy, the guy in recovery, the English dude. What's his name? I've gone blank. Just pass my laptop here. I'll get it up in a second. Do you know the guy? He was in Get Him to the Greek. Russell Brand, not Richard Branson. But I was like, Richard Branson's in recovery. Surprise, news alert. Yeah, bring it up. Yeah, cool. So, but I want to share this process because I've actually started doing this because I'm in recovery, and so the 12 steps is somewhat, a lot of people be familiar with for like alcoholics and stuff. And then you've got NA as well, which is another one. And anyway, so I got into this book called, it's called Recovery by Russell Brand. And so I just want to share this process and kind of see how this ties back to what you went through. So it's a really interesting take on resentment and how you deal with things. And so what you're supposed to do is make a list of everyone you knew from the age of like 0 to your current age, right? So how old are you now?
I'm 27.
27. Okay. So I'm 40 this year. Can you fucking believe that?
I cannot believe it. You are very good 40.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But anyway, so from like 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15, 20, etc., all the way up to the current age. You basically list everyone that you knew. Okay. Wow. So you don't miss anyone. Okay. And then the idea is that you then say, okay, who do I resent? Why do I resent them? And then you go into two things. How does this affect me? And you look at things like pride, so what you think about yourself, self-esteem, what you think about yourself. Yeah, that's right. Personal relations, the script that you give others, sexual relations, ambitions, security, what you need to survive, and then finances, money and stuff like that. And then once you go through that whole thing, you're writing everything down. You say, okay, because you're not in some instances, it's not going to affect all those things, but it may affect 2 or 3.
Absolutely.
And then you look at what you did in that process. And that's where you really start to get into, what drives you as a human being, because what I find interesting about this, they call them gifts of recovery, where when you go through a process like forgiveness, right? In other words, you can't get to forgiveness unless you understand exactly how something that happened to you, whether you were 7 years old or 7 years old or 40, whatever the case is. But if you don't really get into how it affects you and what you did in the process, right? So for instance, where did you make a mistake? Like where were you selfish? Where were you dishonest with yourself and with others?
Absolutely.
And getting to the truth, because that's where you find perspective, right?
Absolutely. And I actually like that idea of dealing with life, because I think, sometimes we get so caught in the narrative of, especially, when it's an extreme situation, such as my case, it becomes like there's a very clear villain and there's a very clear, good guy kind of thing. So people almost support that. So it's like, okay, if you're going to live your life in pain and resentment, like society will pretty much support that narrative, right? But it's about saying, okay, but I don't want to, so how is this impacting me? And how much responsibility am I going to take? So I can't take responsibility over Eugene's actions, right? But I can take responsibility over how am I going to live from this point forward? Am I going to say my dad died in vain? Or am I going to say, you know what, actually, he died so that I could live a better life. So am I going to take that opportunity? And it really is about just dealing with your own emotional body, because like you said, I think the beauty of that is really saying, how is this impacting me in all these arenas of my life, right? Because all of us I love it when people think they walk into relationships and like, tethered and I'm baggage free. I'm like, yeah, okay.
So pure.
I'm so pure. I was in a nunnery.
Nothing's ever gone wrong in a relationship for me.
You don't look like it has, Matt. I have to be honest. You look like you've done all the right things. It's the other person. Okay, it's the other person.
It's this lot they know.
No, but I think like, even right now, right? So even though I'm in this industry where I help people forgive, there's still certain traumas I still carry into certain, relationships, especially. I think our closest intimate partners actually get the brunt of who we are, because it's the brunt of our wounding. And this is the person who's supposed to, see all of you and accept all of you, right? And you don't even see and accept all of you, but you've got this very high expectation on someone else to love me as I am. And then you look in the mirror and you don't love you as you are, so it's a bit hypocritical, right? So it's just about addressing your own, where you went wrong and what, how much of this you gave away to someone else, how much of your happiness you gave away to someone else, how much of, whatever it is, your anger, your time, your resentment, your thinking, that you gave away. And even though you can be like, I was a perfect person in this union and this person is just an asshole, then I'll stop choosing assholes, so that becomes the real thing and people don't love that. you know?
No, they hate the truth.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez.
But it sucks. I don't even like the truth a lot of the time.
I'm like, so, yeah, exactly. I mean, but people don't want the truth.
Absolutely.
You know, and that, you know, it's funny because there's no handbook for this stuff. You know what I mean? It's like you're born and then life happens, and most of the time it's shit. You know, it's most legit. It's like, absolutely. To your point, you spent until you were 16, you were pretty much miserable, right?
Absolutely.
And by the way, that applies to so many people in so many different aspects. And it's like, it's in the pursuit of happiness, because it's not the destination, it's the process of getting there that matters. And what we don't have is a process to deal with life. And so what we become is just passengers. We become at effect and never at cause. Do you know what I mean? And so,
absolutely.
and to your point, we just don't get over things that happen to us. We would rather park them and not deal with it, and not be honest with ourselves more than with others, right?
Yeah.
Although that is a very important thing. But we don't have a process, and that's why that Russell Brand process. It's people seem to think that, you know, if you're an addict, or if you have a disease of addiction, that process doesn't apply to you. But when you think more broadly about all the different kinds of addiction that you have, it's technology, it's sex, it's food, it's drugs, alcohol, which are the ones that are most popularized. But there's like 60 different kinds of addiction, right? So it's such a prominent thing, and people aren't aware of this stuff. But the first step is becoming self-aware. That this is something that I need to deal with. Yeah,
and I think because of the society we live in, or the culture, or, you know, social media, we're not taught to lean into our pain. You know, we're supposed to run away from it and seek this euphoric happiness. Like, I mean, the pursuit of happiness is probably the biggest pursuit in life, right? We're chasing this thing, like, we're going to get to this point and it's going to be like, oh, you know, I'm happy forever.
It's marriage and kids, isn't it?
Yeah. And then you get them and you're like, you know what? Sometimes I'm not married and I don't have kids, but I can assume in my extensive experience that, you know, there are times that you'll wake up next to your partner and you'll be like, is this the best I could do? You know? In a non-offensive way.
You shut up. She's speaking
the truth. That came out harsher than I intended it to.
But that's what Chris was telling us the other day, right? He woke up next to his chick and he was like, this is the best I can do.
No, but like, I mean, and in fairness, like, I mean, my partner probably, like, if I had one right now, but that's why I don't have one, because I'm always looking at them like, is this the best I can do? But but I mean, I don't exactly wake up looking the way I look now, right? And we like to pretend like we do. Like, it's like Beyonce even released the song, I woke up like this. First of all, you're lying. But you know, that's the thing. So we chase this huge pinnacle that, okay, once I get the husband, once I get the kids, once I get the career, once I get the money, and then it becomes a cycle. Because then you realize that, oh, shucks, I've got all of these things. But firstly, this person is human. They mess up. My career is what it is now. I can't really add more to it. And so we stop. That's when I think sometimes addiction tends to seep in, right? Like, to the really, like, people in top tier society who've achieved all these great things. And you're like, but why are you so miserable? And it's like, I thought this is what happiness is supposed to be like. You know, we forget that it's the everydays. It's that like 2-minute music montage in a movie. You know, it's those everyday moments that you need to seek your own internal happiness and validation. And what makes me tick? I mean, it surprises me how many people don't know what makes them happy. You know, and it's like, okay, so you don't know, but you expect Bob to know, like, you know, and you're like, Bob is my happiness. And you're like, no, he is not. You know, Bob is the community's happiness. So, you know, so it becomes that big issue whereby you need to really spend time, because I mean, you have the most conversations with yourself. And I mean, I had to even check this about myself where I'm like, damn, this chick in my head is a bitch. Like, she needs to really like evacuate the building, you know, because it's like the things we say to ourselves, like, you would never say that to someone, but you look in the mirror and you're like, damn, my eyes are big as hell, you know, which they are. But I mean, that's not the point, you know, but like, we break ourselves down so much, and then we wonder why our external lives aren't, you know, exactly the greatest, you know.
But most people aren't happy. They're not, dude.
Absolutely.
Like, and, you know, and it's and to your point, it's like, well, no, when I make my first million, I'll be happy. Yeah. It's like if you grew up broke and you make money, you buy the dumbest shit.
Oh yeah.
The dumbest shit imaginable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
A bedazzled spinner.
It's just fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's...
Like, what are you doing? But you know what I'm saying? Like,
but I mean, you just need to look at hip-hop videos, right? Like, I mean, new money is a disease. You know, it is. And I don't blame...
That's why you got to make new money old. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, not that old, but I mean, I still want to buy some dumb shit, but I mean, like, but you know, the biggest thing is like, you look at hip hop culture and it tells you that, okay, like, I mean, I was just listening to it, which is so sad. But he was like, it's Drake successful, right? So he says, I just want to be successful. And he says, I want the money and the cars and the clothes and the hoes, I suppose. Right. And it's like, yeah, all of us are kind of, my rapping sucks, but you know, like, it's all these things that we taught, especially when you don't come from privilege or you don't come from money. It's kind of like, these are the things that are going to fulfill me. And then you look at all these hip hop artists and you're like, does Lil Wayne look happy to you? You know, Lil Wayne barely looks like he showers, let alone happy, you know? Ooh, everybody catching bullet holes. I'm on a roll today.
What did you say?
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. Oh, look at him.
Oh, there he is. Yeah, look at him.
What a beautiful chocolate man. Said no woman ever.
He's pretty. He's certainly pretty.
Yeah.
Role model. Really. 6 foot, 7 foot, not me.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
Jeez.
It's so sad. But I mean, I do get the attraction of new money. I've got to be honest, you know. So, like, I mean, you do have to buy some dumb shit. Just know when to stop, you know. And how dumb does it get?
But the reason why you're doing that is because it's that pursuit of something. Yeah, exactly. Inside of yourself, a connection to something greater than yourself. And so we tend to pursue relationships because you think that, oh, well, if I'm in a relationship with this person, that, you know, they're going to make me happy. But that's a fuck up, by the way, because I can tell you one thing I've learned about marriage is that you can never make your wife happy, like, ever. Like, like legit. Like, you can only get it so far. Absolutely. And also, most importantly, it's not your problem. No. It shouldn't be your fucking problem. It's wrong. Well done, it's a false. It's a false idiom, I guess, when it comes to the concept of marriage, where, you know, your responsibility as a partner is to make your wife happy or vice versa. And that's not the point. Your actual job is to present yourself as happy.
You just need to look as happy as possible so that they don't freak out.
Well, you know? But it's like you can't make someone else happy. You can't. It's a fuck up. It's a stupid thing to try and pursue, because you will only wind up being miserable and angry and bitter and disappointed and so forth. And so it's a thing where you need to work on yourself and present yourself as happy, because when you both present yourself as happy, then that's when magic happens. That's when you really connect.
Absolutely.
Because if you start to blame, say, hang on, you didn't do that thing. You know, you didn't do that thing.
But you're so right. And actually, Will Smith spoke to this in one of his videos, and he was just saying, you know, one day he got home to his wife and he said, you know, I quit. And the wife was like, what are you talking about? And he said, you know, I quit trying to make you happy, because that's just not my job anymore. So if you're going to be miserable in this house, I'm still going to go out there and be happy, and you can figure your life out, you know? And I think that is...
Love that shit. Figure your life out. Do it. Exactly. Don't come back until you're done.
Yeah, if you have to live on that side and me on this side, that's what we got to do. But it's so true, though, right? We're constantly looking and searching. But you know what, Matt? I'm actually finding that a lot of us don't love ourselves. And that's our biggest issue, right? We never feel like we're enough. We never feel like, you know, we're accomplishing enough. We're worthy. We search for, we search for those qualities that, oh, like, he thinks I'm all these things, and so I want him. But he's only going to think those things for like a second until he gets to know you, and he's going to be like, okay, I'm kind of tired of always having to tell you how worthy you are, you know. And sometimes we get partners that are like, if I get the most attractive dude, or I get the most successful, I get this, it's a direct reflection on me. And it isn't, you know, I mean, he found you attractive, but it can't be your validating point, you know, and it's from that point of self-love, when you begin to love yourself and you begin to fill yourself up from within, that you start needing less things and less, you know, people, because I don't think you attract, or the right caliber of people stay in your life if you have that mindset constantly of like, you know, I need this person to do this for me, and I need this from this person, and I need this person to constantly tell me I'm attractive, and I need this, right? Which in some ways is social media. I mean, you can see a cry for help on social media, right?
Yeah.
So you see like a girl, pretty girl, she's like, you know, she goes from being fully dressed, all of a sudden, like it's just bikini pictures. And you're like, we know what you're doing, Tina. Like Bob left, didn't he? You know, so...
Who is this person?
I know, who is Bob?
It's like she's definitely speaking from the real people. These are real people. Let's get Tina up on the screen.
Join the conversation.
Let's live broadcast this.
But that's what it is, right? When we constantly need things, and that, you know, those stupid expenses that we have, or putting ourselves into debt because we think that car's going to make us happy, or that house is going to make us happy, or that person's going to make us happy. And then we end up like depressed and miserable because none of it does, because you don't know how to make yourself happy.
But again, I would say that it goes back to forgiveness, right? So I said to my wife the other day, I was like, check this out, because I couldn't fit into a pair of jeans that I wore, like, you know, from like 2-3 years ago or whatever. And then I was like, yeah, but guess what? I love it. I dig me a lot. You know what I'm saying? And she was like, yeah, but you know, fuck, whatever. And I was like, yeah, but the thing is, if you can't love yourself when you're fat, that for me is a great thing. It's like, you know, if you look yourself in the mirror and you're like, I'm a chubby little pork chop, you know what I'm saying? Like,
there's more, like there's more of me to love.
I dig pork chops. You know what I mean? The way they taste, the way they look, like they're just awesome. Who doesn't love pork? You know what I mean? Unless you know, but
anyway. Non-religious factors.
Yeah, but outside of that, you know,
everyone
pork is awesome. We love pork. You know what I mean? But I mean, it's a thing, and so, but it's so easy to go, I'm fat.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I'm not good enough, and I really need to get it. You know what I mean? Like, you just beat yourself up and whatever, and so ultimately you're the one that costs yourself your own happiness.
Yeah.
And so you just got to say, well, this is who I am today, right? I believe that change is possible, and that I can become an 8-pack legend. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then that's fine, but you don't need to honk on the point around, well, I resent myself for getting into this situation in the first place. You know what I mean? And I'm stuck here forever. Yeah. And now you know, no one's going to respect me, and I'm never going to the beach again, and whatever. You know, your mind latches onto that shit.
Yeah.
So it is about just forgiving yourself every single day, right?
But isn't that relationships? That's a relationship with yourself. That's a relationship with a partner. I mean, life is constant forgiveness. You know, it's just a constant state of having to forgive people. And sometimes the person you love the most will piss you off the most. And it's like, am I going to drag this out for like the next week and make my life miserable for the next week to try and punish this person? When you realize that you're actually punishing yourself. You know, if you're going to silent treatment, guess what? Like, you're the one not speaking. You know, I'm just going to go about my life. Like, when you're ready to open your mouth, you'll talk, but I'm going to be happy, you know? And so it's like these weird narratives. And I mean, who said you have to be skinny to be attractive? Like, who came up with this absurd notion, you know, that this is how you look to be attractive, to be accepted in society, to, you know, be of worth. This is how you've got to look. And we tell ourselves these things. You know, you look in the mirror and you're like, when did I gain this? You're like, because I ate and I was happy eating. Okay. And I like wine. Okay. So is it like, am I going to sacrifice wine or a 6-pack? Fuck the 6-pack. You know?
Round of applause for that one. Yeah. Trevor, you listening? Check at his face. He's like grinning ear to ear. It's like he can't wait.
He's like, that's my philosophy. Wisest thing she's ever said.
Do you want to hear how Trevor sounds?
Trevor, please
come,
say
Trevor,
something.
come speak in the mic here, buddy. You must just listen to this. Just listen to this.
I'm so excited.
This man's born for
Trevor.
entertainment.
Ooh, ooh.
Here we go. Ready?
Hello, Candice. How are you doing, darling?
Hello.
Are you entertained?
How could I not be with that voice?
Well, that's why I'm working here.
I love it. What a voice. I love it.
It's crazy, eh?
Yeah.
That's talent, right?
You just
there.
speak like that just all the time. It's not even put on.
Born this way.
Oh man, isn't that a talent? The way I would be killing dudes left, right, and center with that voice. Like,
Radio's coming up.
yes.
Watch out for the blog.
I will be. Wow.
I want to pick up on something that you said about figuring out what makes you happy, because I think that's kind of a key piece to this whole puzzle, and forgiveness is a very big part of that. Yeah. So we know that most people aren't happy. Like, a lot of people don't know how to work out what that thing is. What is your experience in discovering either a passion or something that you feel that can really light you up? You know what I mean? That you can talk and, in other words, speak your truth about and be authentic about, and that you can use to build a business and a personal brand like what you've done. What's the kind of process? What have you learned about finding the thing that makes you happy?
You know, I think this is going to be something that isn't popular with most people, but I think spend time with yourself, you know. And when I say that, I don't just mean like in a, monastery, like go off and become a monk and figure it out. But I think we're so busy running away from ourselves, right? So when we're alone, we blast music, we constantly trying to stimulate ourselves. We're on social media, we doing all these things to distract ourselves from ourselves. And it's like, you need to figure out like spending time with yourself and just thinking and, being like, actually, I'm not an awful person to spend time with. I'm a pretty chilled, cool human being. And I think when you start spending time with yourself, it starts becoming a bit clearer, because it's like, what lights me up? Like, what am I drawn to? What do I enjoy speaking about? Like, what do I enjoy, when someone texts me about this thing, it just makes me so happy, and I'm not a believer in like, you have to make your, passion a business, you have to do these things, but I do think that you do need to at least know what you're passionate about, if it's music, if it's art, if it's just being outside, if it's your dog, if it's your cat, if, whatever it is, animals, or you know what I'm saying. But that can only come, honestly, from spending time with yourself, at least in my experience. It's being able to be in quiet, like in a quiet state without judging yourself, without being like, oh my God, this is a thought, therefore I am my thought, being able to be like, no, that's just another thought. And, just processing that, okay, so why am I feeling this way? What about this makes me happy? And really getting to know yourself a lot better because I think a lot of people don't know themselves, because they don't want to spend time with themselves. They don't want to take that bit of a break from the noise and say, why am I feeling like this? Because I think sometimes we'll like, especially let's say with rage, right? Or anger, you'll say, I'm angry at this person for doing this. But if you actually say, why am I angry? You're angry at something else, it's just that this became a catalyst for you to express that rage or anger. Same thing with passion or things that light you up. When you're in a state of happiness, be like, actually, what is making me happy? Why am I experiencing this, elation and happiness? And sometimes it'll be like spending time with family really brings that out in me. Or sometimes it's like spending time with family does not bring that out in me, so.
Preach.
So.
I hate Christmas for that one reason.
Oh.
I got lots of hands going up in the air.
But it's just those moments and really paying attention to your own emotional body and saying, this makes me feel great, this doesn't make me feel great, and moving and navigating your way. And you do that again and you're like, it still makes me feel great. It wasn't a fluke, so then you start building on those moments and emotions and feelings. Yeah.
Well, and I suppose what you're saying is have experiences, right? Put yourself in situations where, you haven't done that shit before, because how do you know? Until you've actually experienced something. I want to touch on, I had Peter Sage on the show probably 2-3 weeks ago. So he was in prison for like 6 months for like some misdemeanor thing. Anyway, but he, spent 15 years with Tony Robbins, and he had this massive coaching business and whatever. And he wrote this book, and he's transforming prison systems all around the world and what have you. And he said something right at the end of the show, and I've been trying to like get through it in my own head, and I want to kind of discuss it with you, and maybe we can do it together. But basically he said, working on yourself is a waste of time. He said the only thing that matters is making a difference and contributing, because that's actually where you'll discover things like passion and growth and kind of the spiritual principles that are applicable to you and your modus operandi. And when he said that, I was like, fuck, that's really interesting, because it goes completely opposite to the program of recovery, to so many doctrines out there where it's like, well, you got to find your passion, you got to come from within and whatever. Do you know what I mean? It was quite an interesting thing. It was like, so is working on yourself a waste of time? I know that's such a debatable point, but he was like adamant about that shit, because he was like, I am this guy. And when I said to him, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? He like, remember that he like launched into the most clear, pronounced, like incredible, this is who I am. And it was all about contribution. Like, I am a secret agent of change, and it's like, I'm going to change, like blah, blah, like proper heavy stuff, like positive stuff, obviously. But it was really interesting for me. So we're talking about forgiveness, which is a very personal thing, and you know, something has to come from you. What do you say to that?
The one thing that this industry has taught me, which is the speaking industry, or even the self-help industry, or, even Tony Robbins, is there is no one size fits all, So, I mean, it's very bold and, beautiful that, he stands so firmly on his convictions that it is about service to others. And I think service to others is a huge contributor. But I think I work in a field where almost everyone is of service to others. But I've spent one-on-one time with those people, and they're not of service to themselves. And it's like, if you're not, like, you can't fix the world without, if you can't fix the world within, and sometimes we get so, we dive into all these social causes because we're running away from ourselves. And it's like, we can't find happiness within our own homes. So we run out and we try and be of as much value to the world as possible. So it's like, okay, so that person validates me and that person validates me. So I'm a good person. My life is okay. Like, I'm doing all these great things. And I think it is important to do great things. But I think it's also important to realize that you are important, and if you are serving people from a place of lack or from a place of wounding and from a place of hurt, you are doing yourself a disservice and you're doing them a disservice, and I've heard this philosophy before, funny enough, about like, just be of service to others and you will never, be sad again. And I'm like, no, I've done service for others and I've been incredibly sad when I got home, and it's like, because you almost live in this dual reality. One aspect of you is this incredible celebrated person who's like, the whole world is like, wow, Mother Teresa. And then you go back behind closed doors and you don't love yourself. You're not happy with yourself. You're not content with your life. You maybe not finding love. There's all these things going wrong. And you're like, but if I'm so incredible, then why is everything else about me not incredible? Why is the rest of my life falling apart? So I think, it's very difficult for me to agree with the point that it's just one way. I think it's a combination of both things, because it's very difficult to say, discover your passion and just be a monk, because if your resilience is never tested and you are never in because living is challenging. Human beings are challenging. And so if you never come into contact with other human beings, how do you know you're peaceful? It's very easy to be peaceful when I'm removed from everyone. I'm like, I'm a great person. I'm amazing. And then like, I'll come into contact with someone and I'm like, am I as good as I think I am? Is prison really not for me? So it's like, you have to challenge your own perspective. And by doing that, you need the balance of both. You need the isolation of saying, this is what I'm working on, this is my wounding, and this is what I'm giving, and this is what I'm receiving in return.
I love that doctrine of there's no one size fits all. And that is so important, because I don't know, like even in my own life, when I was going through, like when I was 26, I went to Monaco, spent £12,500 on a 2-week seminar. I was run by an Irish dude who was like a mind power, like incredible communicator and whatever, but turned out to be like a bit of a cult. Okay. But I didn't realize that at the time, because it was like, well, how can it be? I mean, you're going to like paradise, spending 2 weeks there, and it's like I genuinely came back a different dude, but positively, right? And so, but where I fucked up was that I took everything that he said as gospel. I was like, if this is exactly how you're meant to live. Do you know what I mean? But I was young and I didn't have any better clue. I had no mentorship, nothing, right? So I was like, well, hey, you just do what you do and you wind up in these certain situations. So, and it took a while to work out that there isn't a one size fits all. It's like, so what I learned basically was like, whatever it is, if it's Pitch to Win by Justin Cohen, if it's Grit, Guts and Glory, Any Game Principles for High Impact Entrepreneurs, or whatever the fuck it is, if it's the Bible, for instance, and I'm using that as a very loose example now, but take what works for you and leave the rest. because you are
Absolutely.
unique. There is no one size fits all. You know what I'm saying? Like if
Yeah.
there's 7 steps in pitching, making the perfect pitch, take number 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Make it your own. Do you know what I mean?
You are so on the money. And I think even being in this industry, I think the one thing I've had to challenge even about myself and, a lot of speakers, not Justin, but a lot of other speakers I've spoken to were like, no, you've got to develop a formula and this formula will make you great amounts of money. And I was like, but I don't want to lie to people. I'm like, just because it worked for me and this is the process I took does not mean it's going to work for everyone. And ironically, the one thing that both helped me and almost messed me up was the law of attraction, right? So I think I was around 16. Yeah, it was around the time I was discovering myself, right? So it was about 15, 16, and I was trying to figure this thing out. And I was like, the mind is all powerful and almighty. And so I was like on this journey and I was like, I've got to be happy all the time. So
or I've got to watch my thoughts.
Oh, my thoughts are everything. If I'm not happy and enthusiastic, I'm gonna die miserable. So like that became my path, right? And I'm very much that kind of person. Like I want to entertain an idea and give it my all before rejecting it. So I went onto this thing of like, I will wake up, I will meditate, I will tell myself how amazing I am, and I'll walk into the world and the world will show me how amazing I am because I'm attracting it. And so when I wasn't attracting great things, I was like, what am I not attracting? It's
not working for me. The universe hates me.
And you can't even say that. So you can't even have authentic emotions because when you feel down, you're like, I can't feel sad. I'm so happy. So I started having like this weird paradigm that I was living in where outside I'm like, I'm happy. I'm always happy. The universe works in my favor. And inside I'm like, but does it though? And that's the thing. So so it actually made me almost, because I was diagnosed with depression when I was around 16. And for me, I didn't take medication for it. So I had to, figure this thing out. And so I was like, okay, mind power has to be the thing because it's happening in my mind. Therefore, it's got to be fixed in my mind. And so it actually led me into a deeper depression because it didn't work. It didn't work for me the way it was working for everyone else. And they're like, I manifested a parking, next to the shop. And I'm like, I can barely manifest parking like 10 rows away from the shop. And I was like, and I left the house thinking my parking would be there. And so you start really like questioning yourself. Am I not enough? Am I not doing enough? So the one thing it brought to my attention is, yes, your thoughts are powerful. What you think about yourself is powerful. And you've got to really change the narrative in your mind. But then I had to throw everything else away because I was like, this is not a practical solution to life because they're saying like, you wake up in a shack. It's hot as hell. You've got one bed, that's a kitchen, that's a bathroom, that's everything. And, you see poverty around you and you have to have this abundance mindset. And it's already difficult enough being an anomaly in that environment, for example, like, the fact that maybe you're the only employed person in your community. But now having to be like, I'm going to attract a Bentley. It's like, where do you even begin with a Bentley? Like you've never seen, right? Yeah. You've never seen someone drive a Bentley. You've seen them, but you've never, in your immediate environment, you've never seen a Bentley. And now that's what you want to attract. So it will mess you up, And I think with any philosophy, with any school of thought, it's like, I think the one thing I loved about the Buddhist philosophy was the mind has to be able to, entertain an idea without accepting it as its own. So you can entertain it and be like, oh, I can see why that worked for you and I'm happy it did, but it doesn't work for me. And without people taking it personally, like my philosophy is like the alpha and omega of I'm like, listen, there are enough religions in the world, and we've all known that if there was one philosophy, all of us would worship the same, and we'd all go to the same school or like place of thinking, but it's just not that way.
The point is though, you have to be curious.
Absolutely.
To explore it, right? So there's a guy called Wim Hof. I don't know whether you've heard of him. So he's a Dutch dude. He's called the Iceman. So he climbed Mount Everest in shorts. Okay. Now this is like a legit dude, right? He spent 1 hour 44 minutes, broken all kinds of records in freezing temperatures. 1 hour 44 minutes in like the Antarctic ice water, right? Where there's core body temperature not dropping. Like he's done some stuff that's just baffling scientists. And so I got onto this chap through Russell Brand's podcast. And so he's very much about breathing, and he does this thing called hypertension and power breathing, which I started to do. So you can hold your breath for like literally 3 or 4 minutes, which is pretty cool, where your brain goes from that point, which is quite rad. And it's all about activating parts of the brain which are numb.
Wow.
Because if you take warm showers every day, you've got 120,000 kilometers of capillaries in your body. And so the biggest cause of death in the world is heart disease, right? Which is a vascular thing. And so, or heart attacks and what have you. So he's saying, well, if you put yourself into freezing cold water or an ice bath or what have you, or just have a cold shower every day, that you activate parts of the body which are never activated. And as a result of that, you can fight disease. And there was one particular study that they did. He took him and 16 other people, normal people, and he took them through his kind of way of his own doctrine, right? The Wim Hof method, it's called. And they injected all of them with a strand of E. coli, I think it was, or something like that. And they put them and they monitored them, all of them. Prior to this, there were 64,000 people were tested for resistance for different reasons and so forth. And they all failed. And all 16 of these people demonstrated a way to fight this disease, which was injected into them under environment and controlled conditions, just through breathing. Wow. Which is crazy, right? Because you think, well, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I started doing this stuff, right? And then I was like, fuck, do I really want to jump into an ice bath? Is that really something that I see myself doing on a daily basis? Like, I get it if you're a high performance athlete. You know what I mean? And you're getting smashed in a rugby match, or if you're an NHL player or what have you, or if you're like an entrepreneur like me, you know what I'm saying? But but whatever it is, it's like, is that really something that I see myself doing? Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But now you could say, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go fuck the cold thing because, hey, I just don't take cold, right? Unless I'm snowboarding. But I'm going to take the breathing thing because you know what? That actually makes me feel good.
That's it.
You know what I mean? Or I'm able to, like, it's crazy. Yeah, balance, exactly. Yeah. Because that's actually a big part of being happy, because you find like you get drawn, like life, as you say, life brings you into certain situations. Like, I haven't gone to the gym for like 2 months just because the business is sucked me into it. You know what I mean? And to be okay with that is one thing, but also to go back to something that it resembles balance, you know, whatever you define that being.
Absolutely. And being flexible with yourself, right? Like giving yourself permission to be like, actually something else has required more of my attention, and doesn't mean I'm less disciplined. And, you know, I think, who is this speaker? But he's pretty much like, yeah, you've got to follow a routine all the time. And if you fail on your routine, you failed as a human being. And it's like, okay, listen. First of all, that's heavy. Very personal. But yeah, so it's like, you know, like even the breathing and the shower like thing, because I know for me, even the shower technique, where I've read in other books that, you know, if you can take your normal shower and then just, you know, for a minute, just switch off the hot water and you'll feel energized. And I really do. I just don't enjoy it. Like, I'll feel great, but it will just feel awful. It sucks. Like, oh my God, I'm getting hypothermia. You know? So, I mean, after like, you know, my mind settles down, I'm like, oh, that was great. But I'm like, I don't want to do that.
When you're in it, it sucks.
Yeah. But, you know, isn't that like gym and everything else, right? It's just got to be like something that fits with your brain chemistry and what works for you. Because I've seen people like with diets, right? Diets are probably one of the biggest things that we can measure ourselves on, where some people will work on one diet, but they'll completely fall off another one, you know, because it's just about what works with you. What can you maintain physically? Because there's no point being hungry and miserable. Because I know about you, but damn, like if I'm hungry, which is like a lot, I'm miserable. Like, so I always have to have food. Like I will have a snack bar, I will have something, but you know, and some people are pretty okay with being hungry. They're like, but I look cute though. I'm like, I don't care. I'd rather not look cute and be very well fed. You know, like call me a pork chop. I'm fine. You know. Like,
that's the episode. That's the name of this episode.
Pork chop.
Inside pork chops.
The life of a pork chop, walking, living and breathing amongst us. But that's really it, right? Giving yourself the balance that you need to be able to live an effective life. Because it's almost like marriage as well, right? A friend of mine's getting married, she's engaged, and she was just telling me, like, you know, they were doing all these things, these routines that people were expecting them to do, because it's like, you're engaged now, you cannot live like, you know, the heathens, you've got to be like, you know, act right. And they followed all these routines, and they were like, I can't stand you now, and so they had to like sit together and be like, but this was never our relationship. This doesn't work for us. This is what works for us, and it's not traditional. It's not what everyone else does, but it works for us. And I think that's with life. You need to figure out what works for you, not what works for everyone,
Speaking of what works for you, let's wrap this up. Why do you do what you do? I mean, I get the story, right? Yeah. But there must be more to it. So what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Food. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But food is a big one. But
Maverick said the same thing the other day. I was like, would you like a 1 week all expenses paid trip to Mauritius? He was like, no. I said, what do you want then? He goes, food.
Like you and I, same wavelength. The greatest people think alike. No, but I think on a more serious note, for me, as much as sometimes people will look at what I do as like, I'm giving of myself and I'm being this incredible human being who's doing all these things. But for me, it's truly like it fills me up. Like it's a very balanced exchange for me, being able to firstly let people listen to what I have to say. I mean, for me, that's a blessing that people want to hear my voice and they want to hear what I've got to say. And then also getting the response back. I mean, that fills me up so much. That makes me happier than I can't state. Like it's so fulfilling to know that you just help someone think differently, so for me, it's just become almost an addiction to try and help as many people think differently about their story, their narrative, where they are in life as possible. So that gets me out of bed, just trying to spread the message of you aren't your story. You aren't that single narrative that you've married, like you are multiple different things and you can achieve incredible things. But this does not have to be, you don't have to walk through the world saying, I am, so-and-so and I'm a victim. No, you are triumphant. That thing didn't break you. That thing that you thought was going to break you, it didn't break you. You're still here. You're still kicking ass. You're still an amazing human being. So for me, it's just a really amazing, exchange of energy. So, I mean, I can't see myself doing anything outside of the human relations field because it fills me up so much. Yeah.
Candice Mama, everyone. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah.